Hey, I'm Paul, and today we're going to talk about MOPS. Now, this wasn't a super planned out tutorial, but rather me just playing in Houdini with some MOPS nodes, and I came up with these three scenes. So I will walk you through from scratch how we can build them, some of the different MOPS nodes and what they do, and how I like to use MOPS in my workflow. So let's jump in and let's take a look at them. So I'm in a new scene of Houdini. I'm not going to talk about how we install MOPS. I'm going to just kind of jump in and create a project. So let's call this 01 and we'll call this look at. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a box, and look at that, beautiful. We can make it just a little bit smaller, and then for good measure, let's just add a poly bevel, get a little bit of roundness on those edges, something like that. And we can add a normal node just to fix the funny normals by face area. And so now we get that. We can use a match size node and just place this on the floor. And we also will place it in the min there. So we have a cube that's sitting there. The next thing we're going to use is a MOPS instancer. Now, if you're coming from Cinema 4D, this is the same as a cloner, or very similar to a cloner, not the same as, but similar. And if you're not a Cinema 4D guy, this is very similar to a copy to points, except that it kind of does all the copying and points and all that inside here. So you don't need to feed in points, but you can, and we'll talk about that later. But it has a bunch of different options within here, and we're not going to go through them all, but you can see here, this is a grid, and then there's the sizing. So let's go back to default and let's just turn these a little bit lower, or maybe they need to go a little bit higher. Okay, there we go. So now we have a grid. It took me a little while. I don't use this very often, but you can also do a fixed number. This is what I tend to use a little bit more, and this just makes it easier. And now if you want, you can come in here and just make your box smaller, and you can see that this is scaling from a corner, and that's because of the way that this is set. So if I set this back to center and I scale my box, you can see now this is scaling center. So it kind of just depends on how you want to set this up. This min size can kind of give you some options there. So we have this grid. We also have a radial function, which is radial, like you would expect. You can create a linear, which is just a length, and we are going to use spherical. So that is basically going to create a sphere like so. So I'm just going to make this smaller. Let's make our radius of this a little bit bigger. So we have something like that. Now our cubes are too big, so we can either come in here and we can scale them there, but you can also scale things inside the instancer, which is helpful. So we can just scale them here. So sometimes it's easier just to do this. And then we can jump into here and we can just give it a whole lot more points. So now we have a lot of points and they instance onto this. Now, if we create a sphere like so, and we make this polygon and we scatter some points, and then we do a copy to points. These are the points, these are our, and we just need to add some normals in here. And then this box needs to be a lot smaller. Okay, so this is roughly the same idea as what we're doing here. But now obviously, because we made the box smaller, the poly bevel made them way smaller. So we can jump this up, and we could change the size after this and we would get the same result. But this is just to show that this is essentially doing this workflow, but inside here, and you have all these different options built in. And if we turn this pack in instance, you can see here we have pack geos, and here we have pack geos. So we have the same thing. So we'll kind of just keep this in mind and know that we can do something along these lines. But for now, we'll kind of just keep it all MOPS. The next thing we want to do is just kind of add some randomness. So we can add a MOPS randomizer. I use this node all the time. It's super fun. You can add random orientation. And let's just make these a little bit bigger. So instancer, we'll go into here and just creep this up so we can see them. So now we have random kind of orientation, and we can change the seed of that. You can also change like the axis that this happens on. So you can see here now we just doing it per axis. So if we just move this one and this one, now you get them twisting, but they're not changing like the orientation on the sphere. So this is super useful if you're doing kind of like a grid of flowers and you just want them to rotate, you know, without the stems themselves rotating. This is a super useful thing to do. We're not going to use orientation. We're going to use scale. and we'll just set everything at 1. And what I want to do is I want to increase the max value of this one. So these go super high. And you can see now that what's happening is when it grows, they're growing inwards and outwards. And this was because of this match size, right? So this is kind of centered and then growing out. And this is why we want to set this to be on the Z axis. So now they're only growing out. So again, if I turn this off and I grow this, they're growing inwards and outwards. And maybe that's what you want, but I don't. I just want them to grow like this. So now they are growing outwards. So that's cool. So something else that we can do is we can add a MOPS falloff. Now, there are lots of different falloffs here, and we will kind of cover some of them, but for right now, I'm going to just talk about the shape falloff. And this one's cool. You have different shapes here. So let's just grab our move handle, and I'm just going to pull this out so we can see it. So this is a linear falloff, and we can preview our falloff, and you can see that that's what the falloff is doing. We have a spherical falloff, so you can't see anything now, but as you move in, you can see that we have a nice sphere, and we also have a box. So if we wanted a nice box fall off, for now we'll just stick to this linear one. And you'll notice that this is not affecting our MOPS randomize because it's happening afterwards. If we drop this in before, now our fall off is affecting our randomize. So, and we can just to kind of highlight this, I'm going to make this smaller. And if I move it backwards, now this doesn't matter where it is in the X space or the Y space, because it's a kind of linear fall off. It's just about the Z space. So now you can see these ones have nothing. And if we preview the fall off, that's because they're blue, which means they have a value of 0. So they're not affecting the randomize, but the others are. Now, if we put this after, it's not doing anything, even though we have a MOPS fall off, but we can use a MOPS transform. And what we could do is possibly we wanted some of these to be long if even still. And so now we can do this. So now our fall off is only affecting this, and we could add some craziness like this. So as the MOPS comes in here, we get some super cool animation, right? So we can do stuff like that. Now for right now, I don't need to do that. I'm going to add a MOPS Aim, and this just kind of lets you orientate or direct them. So this is what we have now. We plug this in, nothing happens. It's aiming at an object, but we don't have an object. So let's just create a sphere, and I'm just going to make this a primitive. So it's nothing fancy. It's basically just a single point. And I'm going to say, put that into the aim target. And if I move this out, you can see now that these are aiming at my target. So wherever I move this, these are aiming at. So I can drop down a transform. And if I rotate this, we get this. So let's just hit $F. And if you're new to Houdini, $F is the frame. So now I'm just multiplying the frame by a really low value. So this will just slowly spin around. Okay, that's way too low of a value. So a little bit faster. Let's hit real-time playback. Okay, we can go 2. And so now this is a pretty cool thing. Now I don't need to animate it, so I won't. I'm just kind of showing you some little bits here and there. There's other things here. You can aim at a vector, which is going to be, you know, these different points here, and you can kind of spike them however you like. You can use aim at points. I'm going to just keep it as aim at object because I think this is cool and it's a super fun way to kind of direct things. So we have this. Let's create ourselves a camera, and I'm going to set this to be kind of a vertical format just because when I'm recording these tutorials, it's a bit easier to see with a split left and right. So I'm going to just set this like that. That looks cool. Turn off my lock. Okay, so I have this. Let's move it down. And we can pull this up. Something we may want to do is just make these a little bit more fat and chunky. And so we can use this transform, and I'm going to just turn off the rotation. And what I want to affect here is not the scale on the z-axis, but these two. And I'm going to copy this parameter and paste relative reference. And what this is going to do is, as I change this one now, I can make them slightly fatter, and these will update accordingly. So I can do that. And now they're nice and chunky. And maybe I want them to be a little bit longer. So let's just increase the length. Maybe a value of 1.3. Okay, I think that's cool. And if we render this, well, let's unpack this. And something we can do here is just add a connectivity. Well, actually, before we unpack this, let's just add an attribute randomize. And I have a random color on each piece. And let me just make sure I bring in color in. And all right, so if we render this, we get something, yeah, kind of a little MoGraphy scene. It looks cool, whatever. But you'll notice that there's a lot of intersections and they don't look great. Well, MOPS has a cool node for us. What we can do is just jump back in here, and this is unpacked. So let's say I have unpacked geometry. I'm going to use a MOPS convert, and this just converts it back into packed fragments. You can turn this off and now it'll create packed geo. And this is very similar to an assemble node. It just does a few other things under the hood. See, this is packed fragments. And if we turn off packed fragments, we get packed geo. So it's a very similar thing, but with kind of a MOPS twist to it. And then there's a MOPS Plus node. Now, if you don't know what MOPS Plus is, it's a paid version of MOPS. All the nodes we've used up until now have been part of the free MOPS toolkit, but this is one of the paid ones. And if we pipe this in, we just hit, and you'll see here it's detecting collisions, it's doing some stuff. And now it de-intersects everything. Now, because these were so fat, you can see there's so many intersections that this pushes them out quite far to get them fully de-intersected. And if I have a look at this, I've kind of lost my nice shape, and so I want to get that back. So what I can do here is just go in here and just say, okay, these are too fat, so maybe they need to be slightly thinner, and I want them to be a lot longer so that when I get to this point here and I de-intersect them, I still get a really nice kind of pointiness. Okay, it's getting closer, but it still needs a little bit more kind of directional kind of force. You can see here that now they still too much. So what we can also do is just give a fewer amount of in the overall distribution. So maybe 400, and let's just create even longer. So maybe 2.5. So they're really long now. De-intersect them. All right. And now if I hit render, these are all beautifully de-intersected. There's no intersections, and so the glass and the thing all works as you would expect. So this is a super simple kind of little setup that we can use for MOPS, and there's a lot of space that we can animate things, right? And this is kind of the beauty of MOPS and how you can do super cool things. So we can easily come in here and just move this around, and this is actually de-intersecting it on the fly. I didn't know we could do this. Oh no, it's not, because this is like a static operation. So if we reset it on this frame, I think it's struggling. Oh no, it's kind of working. I think you need to take this and freeze this so that we on frame 1 when it does its thing. So let's say we take away this. We have a lot of other things that we can do here, like this. We can move these around, and there's some interesting ones happening there. But we can also run some falloffs through here. So let's turn this off, and we can just drop this in here, and this is cool. I'm going to put this falloff over here. So this falloff is affecting now this MOPS aim. So you can say don't do falloff or do falloff. And so now all the ones that are inside of this falloff are being aimed. So if we have a look at our falloff, it is over there. So as it goes in, so let's switch this around and then come in. So these ones are aiming. Where is my camera? Okay, so it's from the back there. So you can imagine that this could be kind of cool if we turn this around again. And as this goes in, you kind of get this closing, and it looks like a flower type thing. And you get all this control. Now, if we move this up, we get even more control, because now it's doing the MOPS aim, or we can turn aim off. So it's all aiming, but now we're going to just affect the height of them. And you can see they all grow on, and we can even move it further still. Now it's affecting the transform as well as the rotation. And again, we can kind of change. We can say, okay, we want some random orientation. We want some random whatever. And let's just reset these all back to default. And now as our transform comes through here, we will get rotation is being overridden by MOPS aim. That's what MOPS aim is doing. So just go up here. We can say now we get some crazy rotation happening all at the same time. Obviously, this is a bit wild. So let's turn off this, but let's change this MOPS shape falloff, and let's add a MOPS noise falloff. All right, so if we have a look at this, you can see this is just a noise pattern. So we can change the frequency and the amplitude. Let's get some, and we can also remap this just to get some that are blue and some that are white. And if we have a look now we're getting these super high ones and these super low ones. And we can also animate this very easily because there's an animation here. And now if we hit play, you can see we have this kind of cool effect, and we can change the time. Maybe it's too fast. And we get this, and we can increase this. So they're growing as well as this is moving, and we get all sorts of fun results. All right, so that's project number 1 with some basic MOPS nodes. Let's jump into another one. All right, so this is going to be called spiral. And what we're going to use is we're just going to use a spiral node. And I just want to create some sort of base kind of shape like this. And then we can just move it down. Let's make it higher, fatter and higher. All right, so something like that is pretty cool. What I'm going to do is just add a sweep node and round tube, just so I have some geometry there. And I'm going to create a sphere. I don't like these polygon spheres, so I always change it, but it can be a polygon sphere, it doesn't matter. So I've got a sphere now, and I'm going to use again a MOPS instancer. And what I want to use here now is one of these. I want to use a mesh, and I can just drag a mesh into that. And you can see I have this. Now these are obviously too big, so let's just make them smaller. And just like that, I have these on there. Now, again, this is just the same as creating a scatter and a copy to points. That's what this is doing, but it gives me some kind of options all in here, and it's fun just to kind of have it all built in, but essentially it's doing the same thing. So again, we can use a MOPS randomize, and we can randomize some stuff. Maybe we make this a little bit thinner so they all kind of squashed in, and then we use this randomize and we can randomize the position, right? So let's just go a little bit back and a little bit forward, and we can do that for all of them. So let's just set this to 0, and we're just going to go back by 2 maybe, and forward 2. So now we're getting some randomness, so that's before and after. And we can also change the uniform scale. So if we change the scale, you get these kind of like crazy looking disk things, and that's cool if you want that. We don't, we want uniform scale, just so we're changing the random p scale, and maybe a value of 0.15 and 1 is good, so we get small and lot, and we want a lot more of these. So let's just come into here and maybe 10,000. All right, that looks pretty cool. All right, so now we have some small spheres, some big spheres, and we have this. And this looks cool. Something you'll notice though is we do have a lot of intersections. So again, we can just use the MOPS, and I'm actually going to not connect it. I'm just going to jump in here in simulation, and instead of 50 iterations, I'm going to choose 2. And this is just going to be a lot faster. Now, it may not be as accurate, but for this, I think it's okay. And you'll see it still takes quite a while because there's so many spheres and there's so many intersections. So let's just see how it copes. All right, so these are all now super nicely de-intersected, super fast. Now, can you do this without MOPS? Sure, you can. Is it much faster with MOPS? Yes, it is. So for me, when I'm busy on a project, it's nice to be able to quickly do things and iterate things. Now, this is cool, and we can obviously render this, but maybe what we want to do is we want to animate this. So we can use a MOPS move along spline, and there's actually some other ones here. I'm just going to use the default one. And again, this is a free one. You can see these have plus, this doesn't. So I need a spline, and then I need pack primitives. Now if I do this, you can see that it kind of compresses them, and we can change this with maintain offset, and now it's exactly the same as it was before. Now if I go into the animate, I have this goal and it moves. So what I'm going to use is just an expression. So take the current frame and multiply it by a really small value. Let's see how that looks. And now it's moving all these points, and it's going to start them again. So it just kind of wraps them around. And what's very cool in this is that you can add some other kind of goodies, if you will, in here. So we can orient curve, and we can say twist amount. So let's give this a crazy high value, and you'll see here that now it's twisting them as it's moving. So that's pretty cool. And you can change where this is happening, right? So now it's, and let's just set all these to B spline, because B spline is cool. Okay. Why did it not change anything? Maybe this needs to be stopped. Okay, it did. I think there's a problem with this version of Houdini with these splines. I remember somebody saying. I'll update at some point. Okay, so now if we hit play, you can see these ones are going crazy. These ones are going just a little bit. So let's just turn this whole thing down. And now we get this really cool movement along there. And it looks like this is not actually doing anything, but it is. So we just kind of have to remember that it's being popped in. And so probably what we should do is just say out for instancer. And then in the instancer, let's just stop this. Instead of sweep, let's just put this in there. This just may help us from deleting this in the future and then finding that nothing works. So that's cool. We have the same thing going on there. And of course, we can use a MOPS instancer and we can use a different geometry. So let's say a torus. And now we're going old school 2005 vibes. Well, let's actually steal this MOPS instancer and just drop that in there. We want a lot less of these. Maybe like 8. And this can be thinner. So if we merge these two, now we have this. Now this is not being orientated properly, so we can come into this orient and just see what we need to do here. Maybe this needs to be on the Z axis. There we go. Okay, so the trick here is to make sure that your actual input mesh is in the correct axis. And now I can maybe make even less of these. I don't need so many, maybe like 4. And let's just, there we go. So I have that. Now these are kind of getting scattered in there. So something I can do now is, because this is now being scattered onto this mesh and I don't want that, I want this to be scattered on this actual curve. So instead of being on the instancer here, I'm going to use the curve itself and change this to curve. And now I get a really nice orient along the curve, and I can change the segments. No, not the segments, but oh, that's cool. I haven't done that before, but that's pretty cool. Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing now, but this is pretty cool. It's making like a solid thing. And I want less of them, but I want to, but if it gets too low, then you can see that it no longer has the orient, and that's because it's resampling the curve too low. All right, so that's pretty cool. And what I can also do is just change this to be a little bit bigger and thinner. So something like that. And now you have these kind of cool, as I said, this is super old school vibes, but it is kind of cool. And it's still animating through here. And of course we can run this through the same move along spline and we can get some cool movement. And let's actually try it, because why not? All right, so now we have this, and maybe we want this to be offset, the animation of this. Maybe this one is going to be slightly faster. So you'll see these are moving a little bit quicker, maybe even faster. There we go. So they kind of move faster than the other ones. And we get this super cool movement through here. The last thing I want to show on this basic introduction is how MOPS can also be used on non-MOPS instancer stuff. So let's just call this copy to points. So let's create an attribute randomize, and what you may not know is this can generate points. I use this a lot for this. We can go in here and say visualize as points, and now I have a cube, and I'm going to change this to inside sphere, and now I have a sphere sitting in the middle here, which is super cool. So let's just create less points, and we can create a let's create a cube maybe, and then let's do a copy to points. So this so far is just going to be all Houdini stuff. So now we have a bunch of cubes that are being scattered onto some points. So let's make this less. And actually let's create a square, just so that these are actually squared. And we can make these a little bit smaller. And we can maybe give it a few more, maybe let's say 500. And we can also increase the scale of this. Okay, so we have this now. Okay, that's cool. Now we have actual geometry, but what we can do here is just create packed geometry, and now we can use MOPS nodes. So if we use a MOPS, so if we drop a MOPS orient, we can orient these boxes. Now, if this is not packed, it won't work. So this needs to be packed geometry. We can also run this over points, and then this doesn't need to be packed geometry. So the thinking behind that is this is running over points themselves. All MOPS nodes can run over points. This, when it's set to pack an instance, is essentially points. So if you look here, it's packed, it's 500 and it's seeing it as points. Now, not really, but we can just visualize in our heads that these are points. So we can change all sorts of different things like the scales and all that, right? Super cool. We can also do MOPS falloffs. Let's do a new one. Let's try a spread falloff. Okay, and we're going to just pick a point, that one, and we can preview this. So sometimes you may not be able to see your falloff. In this case, you can. Sometimes you might just have to display them as sprites to see falloff, but for now, we can. And Houdini in general is pretty bad at packed geometry, so that's just something to be aware of. Like, you just have to be conscious of that. Now we can change things. So let's say we're going to train MOPS transform modifier. And this is being affected by a falloff, and we want to scale this to 0. And you can see our pack geometry went all weird. So if we unpack this, you'll see we have this back. But yeah, sometimes it does weird stuff. I don't know why. So we'll just do it like this. And now if we animate this, you can see now we have this growing effect. So we can kind of make our own little crystals or whatever we want. And that's cool. And we can also change other things in here. So maybe we have a crazy amount of rotation. And then as this is going to be animated on, we have this thing rotating. Now, I don't see any use case for this, but you kind of get the general idea of when you may want to use this if you wanted some cool swirly twirly stuff. So let's just set these back to default. And in general, the growing effect is quite cool. And we have all sorts of like noise where we can add noise and all these types of things on here. We're not going to dive too deep into that in this basic one, but this is just to show you some of these types of effects. Something else to note is that you can run, so let's turn off this. So now we just have actual geometry. And what I'm going to do is just give these a few more subdivisions. And I'll set this to the side. You can use MOPS nodes on non-packed geometry, but not transform nodes. So this is now not packed. It's just polygons. And you'll notice that this has no effect. As soon as I turn this into packed, this has an effect, right? So this only works on packed geometry. However, the MOPS spread falloff, or MOPS falloff nodes, they work on any geometry, right? So this is not packed. So we just have points here. You can see them. We have lots of points, and this is working. So we can do spreads and stuff on this, and we can do other stuff. So there's a mop clip by attribute, and we're clipping by MOPS. Right, so as MOPS comes through here, we are now clipping our geometry. And let's turn off the preview. Let's turn off backface. And we need to actually add some normals or some lighting or something. I guess just the way that it's creating this, it's hard to see what's going on because these are all intersecting each other. So let's quickly pack an instance in these. Let's de-intersect with MOPS, just so that it's nicer to look at. All right, so that's much nicer. And now we can unpack. So now we have normal geometry again, and now we can run our spread falloff. And I have no idea where it's, let's pick a point over there. Okay, so like that. Okay, so as this is coming through, we have this cool reveal effect. And what I want to do now is just add a little bit of noise. You can see this is changing the frequency. I want the frequency to be actually lower. And nice high amplitude. And then let's just keyframe this. Keyframe from 1 to 100 and just get like something like that. And now I have this super cool revealing effect, which I think is quite cool. And this is all just based on this falloff. Now we can use MOPS noise falloff as well. And this node is super cool because what we can do here is just, again, just let's decrease it, increase the amplitude to get these nice pockets, and then let's just add some time. And now if we have a look at our clip and we turn this off, let's just remap this so we can crunch some values. Okay, and now if we hit play, you'll see we get this kind of behavior. So obviously this can work on just a regular, just a box. Let's make it bigger. Let's give it a bunch of subdivisions like this, pipe this in here, and we have the same idea. So this is just clipping and you get this super cool thing, and we can poly extrude this. And you can also poly extrude it before the time. You just don't get the in-between bits. We can do a remesh to grid. This is not a MOPS node, but just a fun node to play with. And let's turn this down. Give some smoothing. And now this is getting a little bit slow, but you can see you can kind of create some really fun little setups super quickly with this, kind of like some fake fluid type stuff. And of course, if you let's pipe the box into here. Let's just see, do we have, yep, that's working. So we're clipping, and now we get some kind of cool growth effects. And you can see that we have a little bit of this fall off here, so we can use a MOPS remap fall off and just drop that in here. And if we visualize our fall off, preview it, let's turn off this, and we clamp this. I want to do that, and I want to invert it. Boom. So it's going to be like that. And then what I can do is just attribute promote, and I want to promote this value MOPS to a primitive, and I'm going to give it a new name, and this is going to be Z-scale. And that's because inside this poly extrude, I can use a Z-scale attribute over here, this primitive attribute, and this needs to be individual components. You can see now that these are being extruded more than these, and so I can change this here. So this is the amount, and I can give it a nice fall off here, B-spline, B-spline, B-spline. And I don't want these to be 0, so I can just pull this up a little bit, and maybe this is going to be a value of 2. I know, 1. Oh, okay, I had like one weird knot there that was throwing me off. Okay, so I have this, and what I want to make sure is that this back one here is not completely 0. So maybe something like that. That is the wrong way around. So I can just come in here and say 1, 0. So that's going to be 2. Okay, so let's just say we're happy with that. And now that's separated because of reasons, but now as it grows on, you get this kind of cool leading edge here. And obviously you can finesse this to make this a lot cooler, but you get this cool vibe. So while I was editing this, I realized that I couldn't quite leave you with a geometry that had a huge gap in it and just tell you that there are reasons that that's happening. So I want to show you a cool way that you can do this without the whole poly extrude. So I'm not using this Z-scale anymore. I've turned that off. And what I'm using instead is the soft peak. So just to run you through it, I've got my MOPS fall off that I'm remapping here. I'm poly extruding everything the same amount. Then I'm subdividing it just so that I have some more geometry. And then I'm using the soft peak mode in attribute, and I'm supplying the MOPS fall off. And so what that's doing is that the parts of MOPS that are a lot are kind of extruding the most, and this is like a displacement effect, and I can control that over here. And then what I'm doing is I'm attribute blurring this, and this just gives me a really nice kind of smooth fall off. And I'm using this MOPS fall off so that it's only smoothing this area. So if I go really high, you can see it's just affecting this area. Then I use my remesh to grid, and I'm transferring MOPS back onto here, and then I'm just blurring MOPS, and I use that in the render just so that I can get a cool kind of material fall off thing here. So now we get that really nice kind of liquidy look over here. And all I ended up changing here just when I was rendering it is I picked 2 points to start, 1 point here and 1 point up here, so that when the MOPS fall off goes through here, it goes from corner to corner. So I hope that helps, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I will see you next time.